as you were developing curl, like, what have you found to be some of the biggest challenges you found along the way?
Oh, the biggest challenges.
I'm sure that's a very
well, there
broad
are many
question.
challenges. So we've been around for a while, right? We turned the curl itself turned 25 earlier this year, so we've certainly been doing this for a long time. Now, I think one of the, of course, the early lessons that has always been with us ever since is, of course, that speaking protocols like HTTP, there are protocols, man, they're defined in standards somewhere. You can read the specs and it's there, but it never actually works exactly that way. So one of the lessons is that you really need a long time, and you really need to just run it with different servers, different use cases, and everywhere across the internet to figure out exactly how strict can you be following the standards, when do you have to be lenient, or when is the standard just maybe a guide, or when sometimes you have to do the opposite just because you want it to work in a specific way. And then along the way, then when the browsers do things, for example, and then suddenly we realize that if the browsers do things in one way, the spec says something another way, and curl does it the third way. So which one is the right way? We always have to deal with that. So I think that's a constant battle we do or have. Usually we try to go. Often we go with the way the browsers do, but because often users want to be able to mimic browser operations with curl. So if they do things a certain way, then we usually go roughly the same way. So that's one of the things that we've, of course, learned along the way, and that's one of the reasons why it takes a long time to get the internet transfer tool or code to actually become good, because you have to have a lot of time and to be able to polish the rough corners everywhere and understand how things actually should work, apart from what its standards say.
Do you have an example of browsers doing things differently than what the spec would expect to be the case?
Oh, yes. So I worked for Mozilla for a while, right? So I worked a lot of the HTTP implementation in Firefox. And one of the, for example, just in maybe an easy but perhaps a little bit sort of internal detail is when you speak HTTP1, it's a text-based protocol, right? So you send a request and there's some text-based headers that comes before the content in both directions. So when you send a request, you send, I want to get this path, here are some headers, and then the body comes, and then the response comes with some headers, and then the response. And for example, when you get an HTTP response from a server, there are different ways for the server to tell you how big this response is, how much data is following the headers here, 2 bytes, 100 bytes, or it can all. So how do you know how big it is? Well, there's this standard header called content length. Pretty straightforward, right? It says how big the response is. What happens if the response has a different size than what's in there?
Okay.
Well, first, how do you know it's different? Because you're supposed to judge, if it says 12, right? Then you know that it's 12 bytes. You just read 12 bytes of the network and then you're done. But you can't do that because there are enough number of servers out there that will say the wrong number, right? And deliver something less or something more. And that is one of those ways where it takes a long time until you realize that. And when you realize that, sort of, okay, but that's just wrong. The server is just wrong, right? So you just return an error then because the server is wrong. But that's not how you do it in browser land, right? You never say the server is wrong. You try to do the best out of the situation. And basically the browser never says the server is wrong. It just, okay, it delivered 11 bytes. So let's try to show those 11 bytes as a web page somehow. Even if it said it was going to deliver 12 or something in that style. And that's one thing. In curl, we usually don't have to be that lenient when it comes to that particular validation. But it's in that vein that sometimes, for example, browsers have a completely different motivation for doing things. They really, really go very hard on displaying something to a user rather than showing an error. While in curl, we many times actually rather have the error so that the user have a sort of understanding what's going on and can take precautions, maybe do the request again or something like that. So, and that also makes it really, really hard to make those decisions. What's the right choice here? The spec says one thing. A lot of users then see that, well, when I use this tool, it does this. It's completely different. So yeah, those things can be really hard. And there are, of course, countless of examples when you really dig into those details. It's supposed to do this, but 1 out of 25 servers do this. What do you do then? Do you call it an error or do you not call it an error? Yeah.
So it's sort of about judging the user expectation there, and sort of the way people are going to be using the tool.
Yes, and sort of balancing just for. I mean, you cannot sort of sacrifice security, for example, just because the users might get a better experience. Then you have to sort of put your foot down. So it's sometimes a tricky balance. What's the right choice here? Like, for example, this silly thing, checking the certificate in a TLS from a server says, of course, sometimes it's wrong. You can't just say that continue anyway, because that's completely insecure. You just have to say fail. There's something wrong with the certificate, even if the user sometimes says, well, I don't care about it. I just want the data. So there's a lot of that. So it's hard sometimes to know which way is the correct way forward. So you have to sort of try different things and I think, of course, listen in what users say. What is the right way forward? Understand the protocols, see what others are doing, and yeah.
And I would assume in certain cases, it would also make sense to include like an override to have both options available. Where, obviously, if it's like really important security stuff, maybe not. But if it's maybe the option of downloading like a broken web page or putting an error, like maybe you want the option to download that data anyway.
Exactly. So that's sort of, that opens up for this sort of option explosion, because suddenly it comes up. So no, most users wanted to do this, but there are always these exceptions. But I have this broken thing that I really want to download from. How do I do that? So no, then you have to add an option for override this check for these kind of stupid servers. So you add that option, and then someone comes up with a different broken server that they also want to download from, and add and add and add, and suddenly you have 24 of those options that add sort of flags for different weird or broken crap, but they're all there, and there are users of them. So yes, and that's actually an explanation also why then the number of options, command line options to curl, really has taken off like crazy since then.
How much are you at now, if you know the number off the top of your head?
257 since a few days ago. So 24 in March 1998. 257 now.
I don't even know what half of these options do. I'm sure they've all got a use case for somebody, but
yes, yeah,
I probably use 3 of the options at most.